All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this short organizational behavior knowledge clip about contingent leadership styles, requested by you via the poll in the group chat. So, before we get started on what the contingent leadership styles in this course really are, first I wanted to quickly cover what exactly the contingent theory is. So, the contingency theory, as we call it, is a theory that states that different situations require different leadership styles. So, leadership is not something that exists in a vacuum. Instead, it exists completely regarding the situation, and its effectiveness is also decided by that. And then this theory leads to the Fiedler contingency model, which is the model that we will be focusing on for the most of this knowledge clip. This model pretty much just shows us that effective groups depend on a proper match between the leader style or the leadership style and the degree to which the situation gives control and influence to the leader. Now, in this model, first of all, we pretty much always assume that leadership styles are generally stable over time. So they don't really change all that much, and thus we can kind of look at their performance over time and see that that's not because of a change in leadership style, but because of a change in the factors that we have. Speaking of factors, this model has three main important ones, and those are, first of all, the leader-member relations, which is the degree of confidence, trust, and respect that members have in their leader. So just how good the connection between the leader and their followers is. The second variable is task structure, which is the degree to which the job assignments are regimented. And regimented just pretty much means how structured or unstructured they are. So if you have a job where it is very unclear how you're supposed to get the results that you want, and you're kind of free to do whatever you want, we call that an unregimented or unstructured task or job assignment. While a job that has pretty much every step laid out in a very objective way with no room for interpretation, that is then a job assignment that we see as a very regimented or structured job assignment. And then lastly, we have the factor of position power, which is the degree of influence a leader has over power variables in a group. And power variables are things like hiring people, firing people, disciplining people, or for instance, giving raises or promotions. Now, the higher these factors are, all three of them, the more control the leader has. And in this situation, we call high factors, so a lot of controls, we call a favorable situation. Some low factors, some high factors, some factors in the middle, we call moderate, we call a moderate situation. And lastly, if all the factors are very low, we call it an unfavorable situation. And I think it's best to show that with a little example. So we can see that in the picture right here on the right. Here we have two leadership styles that we will be looking at. Task-oriented leadership style and the relationship-oriented leadership style. So what we see here is that, first of all, starting in our very favorable situations where we have good leader-member relationships, high task structure, and high position power, sometimes two of them, sometimes all three of them, we can see that the task-oriented leadership gets a way higher performance than our relationship-oriented leadership style. So we can say that in these specific situations, so 1, 2, and 3, with good leader membership relations, high task structures, and good position power, we can say that task-oriented is simply just a better leadership style. But when we start moving on to our middling situations, our moderate situations, so that's 4, 5, and 6, we can actually see that task-oriented leadership goes way down. The performance becomes way worse, and this leadership style becomes way more ineffective. Meanwhile, our relationship-oriented style reaches its peak right here, showing us that in the moderate situations, it's actually preferable for a company to pick a leader that has a relationship-oriented style, because they are just better in situations where you may not have all three factors at the most favorable level. But then we actually also see that moving on to 7 and 8, so our very unfavorable situations, we can see that task-oriented leadership picks up again and becomes the better performer. Now, what this shows us is A, it confirms our idea that groups and the effectiveness of leadership styles depend on the situation, seeing the difference between favorable, moderate, and unfavorable situations. And two, it shows us that it does not always have to be a linear relationship between the lowering and hiring of factors and the performance of certain leadership styles. We can see that both our task-oriented and relationship-oriented leadership styles are actually can just move around based on where they are. So they're not completely linear. So that's good to keep in mind. Now, then with the contingency theory itself explained, let's move on to some of the major leadership styles that we discuss in this course. Starting us off with the most major one, and that is the situational leadership theory, shortly known as SLT. This is a contingency theory that suggests that the best leadership style depends on followers' willingness and ableness to complete a specific task. And these two factors together we call readiness. Now, the way that this system is kind of managed, this theory, you can see in the picture on the right here, based on their willingness and ableness, we have 4 different options. When we have followers that are not very competent, so they are not very able, but they are very willing, they have high commitment, we use telling and directing, in which a leader gives instructions, clear and specific instructions on how to do a specific task. But for the rest, the leader does nothing more. Then we have the second situation where followers may have a little bit of competency, not too much, but some competence, but they have no willingness, they have no motivation. Then our leader needs to take on the role of selling and coaching for their followers. So not only do they give clear, specific instructions on the task, but they also give support, feedback, and most important of all, motivation and encouragement. Then when we have followers that are competent, but they are unsure or they are unwilling, so they have a low willingness, the leader takes on a supporting role. So they do not really give any more directions, but they just focus on encouraging the follower and pushing them in the right direction in terms of motivation. And then lastly, and of course the best situation for the leader, when followers are both competent and committed, the leaders can simply hand over the tasks to the follower and let them handle it on their own. So there's no directing, but also no encouragement. The leader just delegates the job and moves on. That is real quick the contingent leadership style explanation. And then I have a quick show of 3 more before this knowledge clip will already be over. So first of all, we have the leadership participation model, which connects leadership behavior to the level of subordinate involvement in decision making. So pretty much just the leadership behavior changes on the amount of jobs that the followers really take up, on how well the subordinates kind of take up their own role and decide what they will do and what others will do. Now, this model pretty much just states that leadership does not exist in a vacuum and must adapt to task structure. So you have routine task structure, non-routine task structure, which means just a task structure that is not very common, that's not repeated often. And you can have somewhere in between. Now, while this model is great for showing us what types of decisions might be best made with subordinate participation, so where the subordinates can best give their input, sadly enough, that's actually the only thing that this model can do for us, so it is very limited. But luckily, the shared leadership theory actually expands on our leadership participation model by showing us that leadership can also come from followers who influence each other. So then there's not specifically a leader, but all the followers together become the leaders of their project, which pretty much only really works effectively in teams that have a shared purpose, flexible roles, and an autonomous supporting environment. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword, this theory and putting it to use, because it can lead to increased performance and cohesion when your team works well together and they are attuned to each other. But if your team is prone to conflict, it can actually also backfire and lead to a lower performance and just more tenseness in the group. And then lastly, the followership theory emphasizes the importance of followers on success. So it kind of just states that you have ideal followers that will support the leader in reaching their goals, and they are reliable and enthusiastic. So they kind of elevate the leader and increase their performance. But you can also have roadblock followers, ineffective followers that cause roadblocks and insubordination, which then hinder the leader in reaching their goals, which will then take down the performance of the leader. So this shows that leadership and performance is not only based on the leader, but actually also on the quality of the followers and how well they can work together with the leader. Well, that was it for this quick knowledge clip. I hope that this is all clear to you and you now understand the contingent theories and the contingent leadership styles all a bit better. Thank you for listening.